Friday, the 26th of March 1989, and we are going on a short tour of the older parts of Emsworth. We're starting on the Sussex boundary, and we will be going around quite a bit of the old part of the town. Now looking at the Peter Pond, the mill pond, which is private property, and it's managed by the Chichester Harbour Wildfowlers Association. They have an appointed warden who maintains the pond, and there are quite a number of birds which are to be seen here. In the background is a famous Emsworth landmark, the gasometer, which has been here for many years. There have been moves to get rid of it, but at present it seems to be the fixture that it's been for quite a number of years. Turning over Queen Street and the other side of the mill pond. This is the Slipper Mill Pond, and in the background on the left-hand side is Slipper Mill Lane. This, of course, is just over the Sussex border and not in Hampshire. But by a strange quirk, the properties on the right-hand side of the mill pond are also in Sussex, and they have to be reached by coming into Hampshire, actually coming into Emsworth, and turning down into King Street to reach them. We've now come to the bottom end of Queen Street, and on the left is the Chequers Garage site, which is going to be redeveloped as flats, planning permission having been granted a few weeks ago. On the right-hand side is Lillywhite's garage, which has been here for many years. The three Lillywhite brothers took it over in about 1947, 1948, and they were Len, Joe and Charlie. Charlie Lillywhite is still in the business now with his two sons, Paul and Mike. On the left-hand side of the road is the Lord Raglan pub, one of the many in Emsworth, which has been here for many years. You can see the flint work on the side of the pub there. Popular place. It frequently gets flooded during bad weather when the tide comes in on the garden at the back. Straight in front of us now is an imposing white painted building, which is Dolphin House. That was formerly the Dolphin Hotel, and on the 28th of February 1842, under a triumphal arch, the famous soldier, the Duke of Wellington, presented an address of welcome to the young Queen Victoria and Prince Albert at this point, and Queen Street was renamed in honour of the occasion. The Dolphin Hotel was also the scene of another royal occasion, when Princess Amelia, the daughter of George III, came to Emsworth for sea bathing and had a special bathing machine built for her at the end of Bath Road. She received so much hospitality from the surrounding nobility and gentry that her father, the King, held a ball for her at the Dolphin Hotel, which at that time had been rebuilt. Opposite the Dolphin Hotel is the old flour mill. This was the Lee Thomas Mill of 1897, and in fact you can see on the outside of it, against the red brick, two stones which indicate the builder, G and W, 1897. Or indeed it could be C and W. Bit difficult to read. Now the mill has been converted into light industrial units. The facade is still the same. as it always was. It's been very carefully restored, and it is one of the most impressive industrial buildings in Emsworth. Opposite the mill is Dolphin Creek, with a certain amount of boating activity there, although it's not nearly as active as it was up until a few years ago. To the right is a public footpath which leads through into King Street. We're now walking up Queen Street, up the hill, and on the left-hand side are some quite old properties, probably Georgian, with very pleasant red brick, all painted white, and approached from this rather narrow street. At one time, of course, this was in fact the A27, and it took the whole of the volume of traffic travelling between Chichester and Portsmouth. It has since, of course, been replaced by both the short bypass and, to the north of the railway station, the long bypass between Warblington and Chichester. An interesting property here is known as the Crooked House. I can't see anything particularly crooked about it, but it is quite an impressive property. The front has recently been refurbished, and it looks very attractive. Some new development here is taking place adjacent to Queen Street, with a road that is going to lead out actually into Queen Street itself. It's a very pleasant looking development, and it's worth noting that an old tree has been retained here, great care having been exercised in the building to preserve this tree, which is obviously well worth retaining. Newnham House is probably the most impressive building in Queen Street. 3 stories, red Hampshire brick, and all in all a very pleasant and impressive looking property. We are now looking up towards the top of Queen Street, where it turns right into High Street and left into King Street. Again, these are old buildings. Note particularly on the centre building, the red and blue brick one, the little circular window on the top story. We're now looking at the house owned by George and Emily Cassidy, which stands on the corner of Queen Street and King Street. It's a very old property, and the Cassidys have spent a lot of time in excavating it in order to trace its origins. You will see on the front a beautifully restored iron railing and gate, which has been done to exactly the specification of similar railings that existed probably 100 years ago. On the side of the building, the cement work has been stripped away to expose brick and the brick and the flint work, the stones, and a very good job has been done there on excavation, which has enabled George and Emily Cassidy to trace the origins of this property, which go back a very, very long way. Behind the house, they have discovered a well, and inside they discovered under the floorboards 2 hats, which are now in Emsworth Museum, together with several other artefacts which they also discovered in the house. We're now in Queen Street, and the majority of the houses here are Georgian in origin. Some of them are quite interesting, all of them are well cared for. Unfortunately, at this time, the pavement is being rebuilt, and that is causing a certain amount of congestion in the street. But it is one of Emsworth's most pleasant backwaters, and the properties here, of course, are very highly priced. One of them, just opposite the point where we're standing, is on the market at over £300,000. We're now looking at a house called the Hut in King Street, and it's probably the most newsworthy building in Emsworth. Tradition has it that it was built during a long June day in 1795 by John King, who at that time was a shipbuilder operating from premises next door. It is suggested that the chimneys were built on the site and that everything else was prefabricated in the shipyard and erected, as I've said, during the course of that one long day. The hut was much rebuilt in the 1960s, but it still retains its original features. It's a very interesting property and very much ahead of its time so far as prefabrication was concerned. Looking now across to the premises of John Lewis and Sons, who continue to be very active in providing tents and covers, the tents being used, of course, for various functions. In the past, they were rope makers and one of the busiest firms in Emsworth, and they represent one of the old Emsworth industries. We've now got down to the bottom of Queen Street and we're looking out into Emsworth Harbour. In the immediate distance is Hayling Island, and the first buildings on the right here are the Emsworth Sailing Club. You might be able to distinguish the flag flying on the mast above the Sailing Club building. Beyond that are a number of their cruisers, which at the moment, of course, are on shore, having not yet been launched for the forthcoming season. Bath Road is in the background with the houses there, and coming round still further is the Quay Mill, which is now the headquarters of the Slipper Sailing Club. In the harbour itself are numerous moorings which can be seen, the boats riding at anchor with a fairly fresh wind blowing at the moment, ruffling the sea, and with the usual array of Emsworth birds flying around. There are ducks out in the harbour as well, all contributing to a scene which is typical of Emsworth. To our immediate right here, there is a craft being worked upon by Porter Brothers, who have now taken over the former John King shipyard, the last shipyard in Emsworth. Beyond that again, you can see more of the houses that have been built in the last 10 to 15 years on the waterfront here, which indeed has been generally tidied up during that period. We're now looking across towards the Emsworth Yacht Harbour. You can see there the forest of masts of the craft that are hidden away behind the area of gravel and concrete. And you can also see in the background the yachtsmen's deck houses. Quite a number of them there behind the boats. A very popular spot for people there. They can look directly across the harbour from the houses, and of course they can always have a berth in the marina so that they've got their own craft right on the doorstep. The Quay Mill at the bottom of South Street is one of the earlier tide mills in Hampshire. It was last worked by water in 1921, and it is now the headquarters of the Emsworth Slipper Sailing Club, having been beautifully restored by members of the club. You will see on the side of the building metal supports with the letters ESSC. You will also see the new dormer windows that have been put in the roof of the building, very carefully and tastefully done, and blending extremely well with the old brickwork and tiles. This plaque on the side of the Quay Mill is to the memory of an Emsworth fisherman who tragically died on the 2nd of August 1987. Colin Loader. He comes from a well-known Emsworth family, and it was a very regrettable incident. Now standing on the mill pond wall. The mill pond was acquired by the old Havant and Waterloo Urban District Council in the 1920s, and through the generosity of one of their members, Noel Kinnell, who in fact was a brewer in Emsworth, the seawall and promenade were built at his expense. Now looking back towards the quay and the bottom of South Street, you can see the houses on the foreshore here. In the centre, the properties with the gables, they were built back in the end of last century, and apart from having had the new windows and balconies put on there, are substantially the same as they always were. To the right of those, the second property there with the chimney pots was built in 1727 with subsequent Victorian additions in the front and side. But again, that remains substantially as it was all those years ago. On the left-hand side of South Street, on the corner, is a former pub, the Anchor. That is now a restaurant and has been for several years. Up in South Street are many old fishermen's cottages converted 20 to 30 years ago and now making very desirable and pleasant homes. Smuggling, of course, was rife in this area in the 17th and 18th centuries, and many of these properties have cellars and secret rooms which were used for this purpose. We're now standing on the Millpond wall, and I have with me Anne and Strawn Soames, who are long residents. In fact, both were born in Emsworth, and they know quite a deal about the town. I'm just going to ask Strawn to say a few words to us.
Well, here we are on Easter Sunday morning. As normal, it's blowing about 5 to 6, but the sun is out, which is an improvement, and we have a fine view of the Emsworth waterfront. We can see the Kennet residence and the Soames residence, and that very ugly Mountford residence further down.
I hope he doesn't hear the tape.
Well, he knows exactly. Yes. Yes. Lawrence Mountford and I have a competition as to who has the ugliest house. I think he wins every time.
I think we would say A to that.
Yes. Message ends.
Anne, would you just like to say a quick...
I didn't.
No?
Think about it.
All right. Well, thank you anyway. Thanks. Following up from what Strawn Soames has just said, we're now showing you his house on the front here, and moving over to Lawrence Mountford's house a little bit further along the waterfront. We've now come off the quay and we're looking up South Street, and you can see very clearly the cottages formerly occupied by fishermen, which have all been very tastefully refurbished, and as I said earlier, are now eagerly sought after as very pleasant residences. We're now looking across into the square to the Reeves building, which in fact was the old chapel, the old St. Peter's Chapel, and also it was used as a cinema, the Pavilion Cinema in Emsworth, which closed just after the Second World War. The square itself is the focal point for Emsworth. And it's still a popular meeting place for many people. They come on to the final lap of our journey, and we're in Tower Street. On the left-hand side is Trentham Cottage, and just beyond it, Trentham House. To the right of that is Saxted House. Now, all these buildings are Georgian in origin, and they probably represent some of the most interesting properties in Emsworth. End of our little journey around Emsworth, we're at the bottom of Tower Street, looking out towards the sea. Obviously, it's only been possible to cover a very small portion portion of the old part of the town, and there is a great deal of scope left for future filming. Nevertheless, I hope it has brought a taste of Emsworth to those who see this film. It's Easter Monday, 1989, and for the second leg of our filming on Emsworth, we've come onto the mill pond wall, away from the old part of the town, and we're now looking back towards Emsworth from the Emsworth Sailing Club. The mill pond is in the foreground here, and you can see at the back Emsworth with all the houses along the foreshore here, people walking along the mill pond wall, popular walk at any time, particularly on a bank holiday or at a weekend. And the mill pond is a very pleasant amenity to have in the centre of the town. We shall go on and take a further look at the mill pond from Bath Road, and also have a look at the Emsworth Sailing Club. This, remember, is where Princess Amelia, the daughter of George III, had her bathing hut, and where she entered the waters off Emsworth.
I'm not doing that. It looks...
We've now come to the bottom of Warblington Road, and here is the Norbarn open space maintained by the Havant Borough Council. A lovely place for dog walking. It's also a spot here for launching boats, Hailing is away in the background, and the sea today is very, very calm. There's only a slight breeze, not perhaps enough for these sailing boats that are out here in the harbour. They could probably do with a little more breeze to push them along. We've now come to Emsworth House. The present-day Emsworth House consists of sheltered accommodation for the elderly, warden-assisted, and it's run by the Hampshire County Council. The house is built on the site of the former Emsworth House, which up until the beginning of the last war was a preparatory school. The famous novelist P.G. Wodehouse, who spent quite a lot of time in Emsworth, is believed to have taught here. Certainly he stayed at Emsworth House with the headmaster, Baldwin King Hall, and there is evidence that he played cricket with the pupils and generally assisted in the running of the school. The school closed down at the beginning of the last war and unfortunately never reopened. We've come up to Washington Road now, off Victoria Road, and this is one of the few eyesores that are left in Emsworth today. A part of the town that really could do with tidying up and general improvement. This is a view of the controversial Warblington to Chichester dual carriageway. We're looking at it from a point not very far from the recreation ground, and you can see that quite a number of young trees have been planted here, obviously to try and screen the bypass and eliminate some of the traffic noise, which is a great source of irritation to nearby residents. The road has, of course, taken away a great deal of traffic from the heart of Emsworth, and in that sense is a tremendous improvement. It was first mooted sometime before the Second World War and has taken around 40 years to implement. Graffiti is prominent in any area, and Emsworth suffers to some extent from this unfortunate trend. It's usually in the more isolated spots. Emsworth Railway Station has had something of an interior facelift to it, but outside it could certainly do with a coat of paint. We've now come to the Diamond Jubilee Recreation Ground off Horndean Road, and in the background here is the Warblington to Chichester dual carriageway. You can see quite a bit of traffic on that road. New pavilion is being built here, and it is well underway. Next to it is the groundsman's house, surrounded by a very high wire fence, obviously to protect it from the various missiles which might be projected in that direction by cricketers and perhaps footballers. Extended some years ago to take in the area to the north of the pavilion, and it provides a great deal of space for various sports.
We're now in Palmer's Road for a close-up of the famous landmark of Emsworth, the gasometer. We have the lovely Emsworth Riverside Walk, complete with litter and everything else. Amazing how some people couldn't manage to get it in the bin. Some people don't seem to have taken any notice of the final sentence.
We're now in North Street, looking across to the Emsworth Museum, located above the fire station, and at this time there is a temporary exhibition of paintings by members of the Emsworth Maritime and Historical Trust on display in the museum. The building itself was opened in 1900, and it's the former offices of the old Emsworth Council that operated here for quite a number of years. Emsworth Library, housed in a porter cabin at the back of the community centre, is due for replacement any year now. It's been on the stocks for quite a long time to build a new library for Emsworth. The present building is quite inadequate, a great deal of demand for its services, and the sooner we get a proper library in Emsworth, the better. We're looking now at the former Emsworth Church School, which is now the very popular community centre. great deal of work has been done here to convert it inside. The exterior is the same. Looking across now to St James's Parish Church. Church was built in 1840, prior to which Emsworthians had to walk across the fields through to St Thomas a Becket at Warblington. Behind the church, of course, is the good old Emsworth gasometer, which can be seen from most points in the town. Some of the most recent development in Emsworth itself is in King's Terrace and Spring Gardens behind the Crown Hotel. Very popular townhouses here, quite a lot of them, built to a very good standard and most attractive looking. Well, we've come to the end of another little tour of Emsworth, and we finished as we began, with water, looking across the harbour on this lovely spring afternoon. The sun is shining for a change, and although the wind is blowing a little more than it was, it's a very pleasant scene here, and there are a lot of people taking advantage of the very popular walk around the mill pond.